Julius Erving, better known as Dr. J, the personification of style and class on and off the court. He was a legend status at Rucker Park, in the ABA, and the NBA. His brilliance is viewed as the driving force behind the NBA-ABA merger in 1976. Few players have matched his combination of finesse, style, and power. If anyone has matched or even exceeded Dr. J's poetry in motion style with pure power, it has to be MJ. The man needs no grand introduction other than to say he's the consensus GOAT. Finally, we have Kawhi Leonard, a style of his own, one that is often viewed as robotic. He was a late bloomer, winning a Finals MVP before even earning an All-Star nod. He continues to be riddled with concerning injuries that will largely define how his story ends. Nonetheless, he has an efficiency and mentality that has earned him a seat at the table when talking about all-time great players. A surefire first ballot Hall of Famer and one of the top players of his era. Before we dive into the feat that only these three players can claim, let's take a moment to appreciate their careers and some of the bonds that they have both professionally and personally. Let's start with the top team and personal achievements that a player can earn. I'm referring, of course, to NBA championships and MVPs. No player's personal accolades have been better documented than those of Michael Jordan. He's a 6-time NBA champion and 5-time league MVP. But where do Kawhi and Dr. J stack up on this list? Dr. J has racked up 4 MVPs. 3 of those came in the ABA, with the 4th earned in the NBA. He has also won 2 rings in the ABA, with his 3rd in the NBA. Kawhi has 2 NBA championships and thus far no MVPs. If his heavy load management persists, it's unlikely he'll ever play enough games to qualify for league MVP. That hasn't prevented him from winning the likes of Finals MVP and All-Star MVP. In fact, Kawhi and MJ are the only players in history to have won Defensive Player of the Year, Finals MVP, and All-Star MVP in their careers. When it comes to the connection between Jordan and Dr. J, it goes much deeper than championship rings or personal hardware. They were the style tastemakers of their respective eras. Look, I'll be honest, I'm not a sneakerhead, so it wouldn't be fair for me to spend too much time on this when the subject is better left to others. But as we discuss the themes that bind these players, it's important to touch on the cultural relevance of Dr. J and MJ especially. Dr. J wore the Converse Pro leathers, a shoe that was worn by many of his contemporaries. After embossing the shoes with gold Dr. J lettering, they quickly became his de facto signature shoe, known as the J Pro leather. Dr. J himself, when asked about the shoe's relevance, stated the following: "The Pro leather was a change from canvas. There were some experimental shoes before it, but this became the one to compete in. The look was off the chain. It was a work of art." End quote. This cultural shift left the door wide open for a young, good-looking, and charismatic superstar like Michael Jordan to take basketball shoes to a level no one could have ever envisioned with the Nike Air Jordans. To this day, Jordan has some of the best-selling shoes in basketball. Just to put this in better perspective, in 2019, LeBron James had the second most lucrative shoe contract in basketball. He made $32 million from it. That same year, MJ made $130 million from the Nike Jordan brand. This contract has afforded MJ the opportunity to become the first and only NBA player to own an NBA franchise, and has led to his likeness being front and center generation after generation. This has cemented him as an everlasting icon, whose name isn't just talked about in history books, but is actively embedded in society and popular culture to this day. Finally, two of these players are tied together in an extremely coincidental yet tragic way. Both Kawhi and MJ lost their fathers to senseless murders. Kawhi was only 16 when his father, Mark Leonard, was shot and killed working at his car wash in Compton, a car wash that Kawhi frequently worked at. MJ's father, James Jordan, was murdered in a carjacking gone bad in 1993. Upon Michael's return to the NBA, the Bulls proceeded to win the NBA Finals in 1996. The series was clinched on Father's Day, with Jordan winning Finals MVP honors. A lesser-known tangent to that story is the next NBA Finals to be clinched on a Father's Day would come 18 years later in 2014 when the Spurs defeated the Heat. Kawhi was named the Finals MVP. Okay, I'll stop beating around the bush and get to the thread that ties all three of these men at the top of a category in NBA history. They have the largest hands of any guards in NBA history. To put this in perspective, all three have larger hands than Yao Ming, one of the tallest and most recognizable players in NBA history. They have larger hands than Bill Russell, the defensive GOAT in NBA history. Their hands are larger than Taco Falls. Their hands are even bigger than Shaq's. Okay, just kidding on the Shaq part. This may seem like a silly or trivial stat at first glance, and I won't claim to be the first to have made the connection that all three have extremely large hands. It's not coincidental that three all-time great players happen to have the largest hands as well. I'm also not here to state that these three players would not be elite level NBA stars if their hands were slightly smaller, or even to say that they would have not won the majority of accolades they currently have. Basketball, especially at the highest level, is a game of seconds and inches. We see players lose half a step and be reduced from superstars to stars, and then from stars to role players. It's important to note that the NBA as a whole didn't even start to take wingspan measurements seriously until the early 2000s. To add some further perspective to this, I'd argue that a player's wingspan today is the single most important measurement that NBA teams evaluate. There are even drinking games centered around the topic. The size of one's hands is correlated to their wingspan, of course. Players with large hands are more likely to have larger wingspans. To better appreciate how important these players themselves found their hand size specifically, let's listen to Jordan's thoughts on the topic.
It's your weapon.
Right.
Can you talk about your hand? What do you see when you look at this hand? If you would look at it, what do you see?
In terms of?
Its skill.
Well, I have a wide thumb away from my first finger, which gives me the grip of grabbing the ball and being able to move the ball. And it's like having a paintbrush to a certain extent, being able to create, if you can move the ball and move your instrument to an extent that it's pretty different and very rare in this game. Dr. J did this. Dr. J had, if you ever notice Dr. J's hand, his thumb is so far away from this finger, which gives him a better grip and a wider span so that he can pick a ball up off the dribble and do anything that he wants to do with it.
Jordan touches on a theme here when referring to Dr. J's ability to pick the ball up off the dribble and do what he wishes with it. We so often hear in reference to these players how they could get to their spots. Even if the defender knew what they planned to do, they could always get to their spot. It's more than just getting to your spot though. You then have to have the ball control to make a finishing move with consistent regularity, which all of these players do. Let's listen to Phil Jackson's take on the topic for a moment.
It's going to be MJ. He's got that hand. He's got the glove, as the glove used to be known. But when a guy can pick the ball up with one hand when he's dribbling like Michael could do and do that and take the ball to the basket, it's very difficult.
It does make one wonder, is it possible that Kawhi never would have had the opportunity to hit the game winner against Philadelphia if his hands were slightly smaller? Maybe a couple of deflections, rebounds, or blocks would have gone differently that game. Enough to have swung the outcome. And then that's one less ring and one less finals MVP for his resume. Does Dr. J lose his mesmerizing up and under ability? Is he still the icon of the 70s? Or just a really good player? Does his skill still lead to the NBA-ABA merger? Does Jordan lose his seemingly supernatural ability to toy with defenders by palming the ball over their head? His great ball control as he floats through the lane for acrobatic layups and dunks. Is some of the mystique of superiority lost? Does he score a little less, have a few less highlights, and win a little less? Ultimately, is he no longer the greatest?